Hello, 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 and welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World. I'm your host, Jessica, and we have a wonderful guest here to talk to us about Zephyr this week. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, do you want to? We are live right now, so we'll be taking any questions if you're watching one of the live streams. So please put your comments in the chat and we'll answer. But Fede, would you like to introduce yourself and your role with the book? And just introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I'm Federico Sons. I'm an Argentinian games designer. I've been doing this for about 7 years, more or less. Started pretty much the year I moved out from Argentina, about like 10 years ago.
Okay.
I moved from here to London, and I spent it on like 5 years. And initially, I wanted to basically go there to be part of like the acting industry and stuff like that, but I realized that was just not for me. And at the time I was playing at the RP Haven, which people in the UK might know is a pretty big club based charity. Basically just role playing at a club, and you're at the same time donating to charity and stuff like this. Pretty cool organization. And after that, I went and started working with Modiphius. I worked at Modiphius Entertainment for about 2-3 years, more or less, while I was developing my first game, Nibiru. Nibiru came out around 2019, 2020, and it was in 2020 that I started work on Zephyr, the game I'm currently talking about.
Yeah.
And also I moved to Japan then. I moved from the UK to Japan, and I lived there for about 4 years, and I moved back to Argentina just last year. So yeah, that's
amazing.
Pretty much what
So traveling around the world, making games, just another day for you,
yeah.
No big deal. That's amazing. Well, how did you start working at Modiphius? Because I know a lot of people listening, are interested in making games, and are wondering how you kind of get your start in the industry. So what was that like for you?
Well, at that point, like I had a friend that worked at Modiphius that I met through the RP Haven. So London is a bit of a small world in terms of the industry, or at least it was back then. Like if you went to conventions like Dragon Meet and stuff like that, you would just meet up with people in the industry, and it just became the thing where like I had pitched Nibiru to Modiphius at a point to see if they wanted to publish it, and we started talks about that. And at the same time, a position opened up, basically as a play tester kind of thing. So I went and applied for it, and I got it. And I did the play testing there mostly around, I think, the Fallout Wasteland Warfare war game, and a bit of like board gaming stuff. But then because I wanted to do role-playing games mainly, eventually I moved up to assistant line manager, specifically in role-playing games. And I did the Dishonored role-playing game. I worked in other role-playing games too. Like at the time, I don't know, like what's Modiphius organization at this moment, but at a time we're all sort of like spinning different plates at the same time. So we all had like hands in different projects. So yeah, that was basically just being there and participating in the community events and stuff like that. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. So, well, I think we've done a nice like background and history of the RPGs that's led us up to Zephyr. So let's just start talking about that. I think let's jump right in. So can you give us an introduction? So if people listening haven't heard of the game at all, how do you introduce it and describe it to people?
Cool. It's hard to describe Zephyr because it's very much unlike anything you probably have seen before. It's a game. Basically, the setting is a living landmass called Ophoi, and this living landmass, sentient landmass, basically walks, just like goes from place to place, and basically all your adventures happen on top of these giant sentient landmass of Ophoi. And Ophoi happens to be made out of a substance called Zephyr. which comes in 4 colors: magenta, yellow, cyan, and black, which happens to be the printer colors, the colors printers use.
Yeah.
But basically, those colors combine and make everything that is like in Ophoi. Makes the continent, makes the mountains, the rivers, and makes the living beings that live within it. You happen to be one of the Windfall, which is a particular of people that live in Ophoi. And in the game, you basically play. You don't have dice. You have these tokens that come in those 4 colors, and you just grab like a bunch of those tokens and you put them on your character sheet on a place that says Constitution, and that's basically what you're making. So those tokens. And as you journey through the land, you're going to be hunting, gathering, cooking, and basically spending those tokens, your life force, to like push through the challenges that the world presents you. And to recover them, you'll have to hunt, cook, gather, etc. So there's a lot of like survival to it. The way the adventures are framed are very particular because they have a set start, which is an event called the festivities, in which Windfall gather as a sort of like rite of passage into adulthood. They take in obligations from their community, which are the kind of things that the kind of tasks and requests that you wouldn't just ask anyone in any day. It's not like go fetch me some eggs or you know fix the roof or something like that.
I need you to kill 5 chickens and come back.
Yeah, no, it's like there's like a far off mountain pass with a bridge that needs to be rebuilt, or you know, they be like groups from this community disappeared and need to understand why, what happened. So taking these grand obligations, the players craft them. There's a system built in to craft the obligations. So you basically choose how far it's going to be, how dangerous it's going to be, what kind of dangers are going to be involved. It's all player chosen. And depending on the severity of each of the challenges that you start to pick and choose, that tells you how many technologies you'll be equipped with to basically face the dangers of Ophoi. So that's kind of how the game is structured. It's very particular because as you can see, like players are in control of like essentially point C, the last part, so like the grand objective of the game, and the beginning is also set. So the role of the storyteller, the narrator, is mostly to figure out how to make it so that it's not really a linear thing, so that it deviates and the unexpected happens and stuff like that. So yeah, that's basically how Zephyr goes.
Yeah. Brilliant little introduction there. I love that. Thank you. So the game was successfully crowdfunded on Kickstarter and was fulfilled at the end of last year. So if you're listening, it is available for general retail release now. And we've got the link to the web store in the show notes or on the screen / in the comments if you're watching live as well, to pick that up just while we talk. But as you mentioned, you worked on this for a number of years before, you know, bringing it to crowdfunding. So what was your inspiration with the game? Like, why did you want to create this and bring it to life?
So the main inspiration for Zephyr is a whole sort of like tradition of not saying anarchist anthropology, but the anthropology of communities living outside of states. So it's pretty much like it's pretty niche. I think like if you are familiar with the likes of David Graeber, James C. Scott, these are people like speaking in like the academia of like anthropology, but usually writing quite accessible works about what life is outside of states and how our society has come to be formed in the way it is. And I wanted to write that because I think that particularly at this moment, we are kind of in a bit of a crisis of the political imagination of people, like the whole like capitalist realism kind of thing. I think it's a thing that sort of like stops us from imagining other alternatives to societies. And I think that bringing those ideas in, trying to learn about peoples that have organized their communities and societies in different ways through a role-playing game was pretty cool. Because the Windfolk, as they work, they don't have money, they don't have like a class hierarchy, and they basically work around institutions that are taken like from inspiration from the real world and important into the game, and they actually show up in the mechanics. They're not just lore text that like a player would have to skim through the book to be like, oh, this is interesting. You actually interact with mechanics such as obligations that we just mentioned in the intro.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, you've talked about the Windfolk, who the players will be playing in the game, and their kind of culture a little bit there. What other sort of beings are there that live in this world?
So generally, everything that lives in Ophoy is basically a sentimental construct. Like this sort of like the Zephyr in a way is sort of like a sentimental energy that just brings life to things. So in the same way that it can bring a construct like a Windfall to life, it could basically during like a big Zephyr storm, it could bring to life like a bundle of like leaves and turn it into like a being that actually walks and just lives its life. The main well there are other communities that are not Windfolk that are part of like their kin sort of like groups. There is one other particular group which is part of the Salt States or the Valley peoples that are sort of like the main antagonists of the Windfolk that live at the center, the geographical center of the map. So sort of like if you see the map, like it's quite ruggedy. There's a lot of mountains, etc. But in the center, there's like this big valley where there's like the valley people, the Salt States. They live in a very hierarchical society where salt is used as money, and different lords coin their own salt tokens, and they war against each other, and they have mainly a sort of like an agricultural sort of like society, and it mimics a lot of the dynamics that early states sort of had, both within their sort of like social structure and with regards to the people living outside. So with regards to the Windfolk and how they interacted with peoples outside of states. So yeah that's basically the bigger sort of like societies that are represented there.
Nice. And obviously I imagine when storytelling and traveling through this world, the clash, as you say, the main antagonist, because the difference between those different cultures and ways of life would really clash when they come together potentially, or be very confusing to each other. That brings me on really nicely, because a lot of your games have very kind of clear themes in, and you've stated them very clearly with this game as well, that obligation and debt are really a really strong theme that runs throughout. So if you could talk a little bit more kind of about that, as we've mentioned a bit briefly, but also how that expresses itself mechanically in the game.
Yeah, totally. Well, in a way, debt and obligation are sort of like the two pillars that separate the Windfolk and the Salt States. Because if you think about it, an obligation, the kind of obligation that you take at the start of the game that's mechanized through character creation and the creation of the adventure goals, is very personal. It's something that, it's with your community. It's something that binds you to like a particular Windfolk, maybe. It's something that like, it's not something that you can just give to someone else. It's important that it is you that you're undertaking that, and it's you doing that essentially for the community. There's no exchange there of like, there's not like counting value of like money that you're going to receive. It's like you've learned from the community all of these technologies. They're called technologies, but they can be really just any sort of like skill that you've learned, like hunting, like cooking in some way from your community, and you feel a sense of obligation that then just like prompts you to go and help your community somehow. And that basically is entirely opposite to the concept of debt, which is essentially an obligation that is countable. You can count the exact value of it. Like there's a count in like salt tokens, and because it's countable, it's transferable. Like anyone can fulfill that. Not in the way in which you could do like an obligation. Like for example, if I invite someone to like, I don't know, go to watch a movie, I can't just say, oh, I can't do today. Go with my friend Pedro instead, or something like that. It's not.
It's not the
actually
same. Yeah.
between us.
Yeah.
But that is that kind of thing that propels the salt states, and it's ingrained in like every aspect of their society. Like the literal names that they take. First of all, they're born in debt. To create a new being in the salt stakes, you have to take a loan in salt that is going to sort of like be forged into a mask in which their souls will inhabit. So they're born in debt, and then if they can default on their own life if they want to get sort of like a loan, and it's like they're in the last sort of like as a last resort, and their name will be marked with a new letter. So their name is literally an accounting device in a way.
Wow.
It's extremely sort of like the extreme opposite to what Windfall are in that way. So those themes are reflected in that. And then there's the other two sort of like thematic pillars, which are feelings and identity. I've worked with the theme of identity before in Nibiru and the relationship between memory and identity. And in this game, I wanted to talk about feelings and identity because this Zephyr thing, the tokens that you get with like different colors. What happens during the journey is that you can use different combinations of those colors to express a particular feeling. It's like, for example, the color of cyan, magenta, and yellow could be associated within your clan to the feeling of rage. So if you spend those tokens, you can basically write a new link towards an entity, a place, an event, or something that is about being enraged about them. And your character grows, and it has like mechanical implications, of course, with regards to feeling. So as you go through your journey, it's not just you spending those tokens to like, push through like a I don't know, like a cliff or do some effort that you needed to. You also are spending those tokens in different combinations to determine what your character cares about, and sort of like how are they sentimentally connected to the world around them. And that's part of the journey. I wanted to sort of like play with that, sort of like see how the journey, as you spend those tokens in different combinations, would make your character's identity sort of like come to the forefront in terms of like feelings.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm glad you mentioned the feelings and identity, because that was going to be kind of my next question. So the next thing, we've talked a bit like kind of mechanically what it's like in the setting, but one thing I want to know, because we're talking about feelings, what is the feeling of the game? So what is it going to feel like for us playing the game, or as a designer, what was your intention for us to feel? Maybe I should ask, because obviously people have their own thing with games when they play them, but what was your intention for the mood and the feel of the game to be?
Well, so far, I think what we've seen, like when playing the game, because we've had like several games going on, etc. I wasn't really thinking about how the game would feel. I wanted it to be extremely interactive in terms of tokens, because you have these tokens on your sheet, and then there's a big theme that's throughout the game that's sort of like that has to do with ecology and the way the Windfall see themselves connected to the wider world, and how the salt states maybe see themselves as set apart from nature, kind of creating this duality of like we are this people, and then there's the rest of nature, and we're sort of disconnected. So there's a mechanical side to it, which is you have your tokens, which are in your character sheet, your constitution, and then you can basically take those tokens and use them in generally two ways, which are you can spend them, in which case they go to your region, and generally you'll be playing with like a big map of the region you're currently in, and those tokens are going into your region. And if they are in your region, you can sort of like use them in different ways. You can do stuff that, like the players can do stuff that is generally not bound to their characters. Like they can change the weather, for example, or in different combinations, they could alter the environment in different ways. But if you discard tokens, the tokens go from your constitution outside of the game. And generally in the game, the technologies that are associated with feeling closer to the world and feeling part of the world and sort of like inalienable to the natural world, have you spend tokens, and the stuff that sort of like brings you back to that sort of like dual idea of like humanity being in one place and nature being a different thing, and us being hierarchically superior to other sentient beings, that tends to have you discard stuff. So it's to sever sort of like that connection. And one of the feelings that the play feel that you get as you go is that if you want to survive, if you want the journey to be easier on you, and for you to, you know, not always be like hanging by a thread and just having like 1 or 2 tokens left, which makes you very weak to the elements, etc., you want to establish a connection with the regional tokens so that there's recursion. So there's a lot of like sort of like board game feel where you're trying to, you know, use your tokens in a way in which you get them to go to your region instead of being discarded, and then harvesting those back and creating that recursion. So there's kind of like a bit of a game mastery feel that you go session from session. You see players learning to play the game and learning to generate that recursion through those mechanics. So yeah, that's kind of the feel.
Yeah. So as you talk about players like learning from game to game, this is designed to be sort of a campaign played over a long amount of time. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those games that I would certainly recommend. I think they're much better games if you want to run like a one shot at a convention or something like that. I think it's one of the games that you want to take slow. You want to gather up with like a group of friends in a, you know, chill environment, and it's going to go for like a while because you're going to also have like sessions that are a little bit more focused on survival and trying to, you know, get food, get Zephyr back and stuff like that. And some sessions that are going to focus like on arriving at a place where you are going to fulfill your obligations and the challenges that might appear at that point. So yeah, it's a bit of that. It's a bit of those both. So like survival and obligation, kind of like products.
Do you have like a story or an example from a game you've played or play testing, just to give us a feel for what a session might be like and the sort of stories that we'll be telling throughout the game?
Yeah, sure. For example, we played a session a couple of months ago at the local club in which the players started quite like famished, and they had to sort of like hunt and then basically one of the players in particular had a sort of like complicated relationship with caribous. Like they had like this thing where like they first spawned like close to a valley, and to cross the valley they had to find like a guy that really loved caribous, and this Windfall that knew the passage through the valley was like pretty much caribous are my family kind of thing, and the hunter really wanted to hunt, and caribou was the biggest game in the place, so it created sort of like a bit of a sort of like a conflict within the party, like the hunter being like, but I want to hunt this animal, like, and we're going through the forest, and we're spending all of these tokens, and we really need to replenish, so they're really good, but and the other people being like, it wouldn't be wise doing this because, you know, what if this guy finds out we've hunted a caribou and stuff like that. So that kind of popped up, and that took a chunk of the session. And then they find the guy and they try to, you know, be like, okay, how are you going to let us through, or are you going to show us the passage? So they forged a new obligation with this guy. This guy is going to ask you to like scout like some caves in the mountain sort of like range and stuff like it. So there was like that thing where at the beginning there was like this thing about survival, and they ended up like going for maybe like smaller game, and they hunted and cooked. And for example, the person that was cooking there, she realized that a lot of the technologies she picked had to do with sort of like maybe like adding spices and making very like cool delicacies kind of thing, but they weren't super practical. So they struggled a bit, and eventually they learned with the system. And the later part of that session was more of like, okay, we found the guy. We need to basically forge a new obligation, and we have a new quest that's ahead of us to sort of like get us past the valley in a way. So yeah, that was a sample session, let's say.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. And one thing, have we talked about patterns and abilities yet? Have we touched on that?
We haven't.
No. Let's talk about that now then.
Yeah, cool. So more than abilities, like you have technologies. Technologies are sort of like the thing that is going to define what your characters is pretty much good at. And while there aren't really like classes in the game, there are suggested archetypes. And these archetypes in the game, which basically are just a list of suggestions in terms of like what technologies you should pick during character obligation, during character creation, they have to do with survival. So you have your cook, you have your medic, you have your hunter, you have your wind farmer, which is basically, it also kind of like harvest tokens like a hunter would, but it harvests them mainly from your region. So it's more like playing with that recursion kind of game. That there's other specialties like engineer, like a scout kind of thing that like really knows how to move through different types of terrain. And then there's weirder ones. For example, there's the wind glider, which like there's a whole subsystem in which Windfall use like sort of like big fans to glide through the Zephyr winds. And it's a pretty cool sort of like mini game that has you interact with the map, and it's very physical too, because you're measuring distances and calculating stuff. And it's very risky, but it also allows you to like, you know, move really far, really fast, and maybe deliver a message or like get an obligation or fetch maybe like, I don't know, medicinal herb that one of your guys needs to survive some poison that they took in. So there's different archetypes, and they all kind of give you an idea of how to build a functional party. Because that's another bit of like game mastery that the players will need to learn, that, you know, like they need to sort of like cover different areas. You have to know more or less how to cook. You have to know more or less how to hunt, or how to get Zephyr in a consistent way. So there's that. And then there's patterns. Patterns are sort of like something that unlocks when you fulfill an obligation. So depending on how big the obligation is, you're going to get a number of points, and those points are used to weave patterns. And there's like a lore reason to this, which is basically when you get an obligation, the obligation comes with a fetish, which is a small wooden representation of the person you're obliged to. And that fetish is wrapped in linen. And so when you, and it has like a needle stored inside. So when you fulfill an obligation, you can actually pull that needle out and weave a pattern in your scarf. And the character sheet has actually like 2 rows of like little loops that you can sort of like draw a pattern in. And those patterns, like they have different shapes and they have different powers linked to them. And you have to sort of like craftily draw and plan how your fulfilled obligations are going to express themselves in these patterns. And it's a bit of a mini game that you're going to have to like draw these sort of lines and combine them, which interacts also with your feelings, your bonds, those bonds that you sort of like discovered as you went by spending tokens. As you establish those bonds, those are going to empower patterns. So yeah, there's lots of like different subsystems in the game. It's a pretty complex game, and I think that's one of those things that can be a bit challenging for people that are very used to games like DnD. And sort of like very much in the, oh, we have skills, attributes, and we go and kill stuff and etc. That it's a complex game, and it's starting off from a foundation that is very different from the traditional fantasy kind of thing. So
absolutely. What guidance would you say for somebody who perhaps has been a game master for more traditional games like D&D and wants to try something like this? What kind of advice would you give them?
My advice is probably read the book.
Sure.
Of course.
Good start. Good tip.
I have a TikTok in which I basically go through the character creation process. I think going through character creation is a pretty good advice. Like have yourself go through sort of like a sample, create your character like a character yourself to just go through the process. Because that's, I think, the thing that will take the most time. It's gonna take like a long session 0 kind of thing, maybe 3-4 hours. Because there's a lot of like the system itself, the basis of it, how rolls are made, is actually quite simple. It's there's something called reveal, which is you take a number of tokens in your hand, generally between 1 to 3. And the storyteller, the GM, the narrator, does the same. And then you reveal how many tokens you have. And if the numbers are different, the number of tokens are different, you succeed at the task. And if they're the same, you fail. And difficulty basically is built on the ranges of tokens that you have to choose. So if I say the task is 1 to 5, that's actually much easier because between 1 to 5, there's way more chances of you having a different number in your hand than the narrator has. So that's kind of how the role, let's say, is done. It's for storytellers, I think, just having the basics of how that works is important. And also one thing you probably want to take advantage of that is that you are sort of in control of when you reveal the result. So that's a pretty cool thing that this system has versus dice, that a player rolls dice and they fall and whatever happens is then described. You can, as the narrator, describe things and reveal at the exact same time as you're narrating the consequences. So it has a lot of dramatic weight in that case. So getting down with how reveals work and going through character creation once, so you can see how it works. I think that's what I would recommend for this game.
Absolutely, it sounds great. And of course, like you say, a good session 0 to sit and do character creation together with everybody to draw them in sounds good. Another thing I want to talk about is if people are watching live, you can see kind of some pictures of the book and the artwork, but I'd love to talk about the visual identity of the book and the decisions you made with the art and, the graphic design and the layout. Because I know that's really important in this book. It really defines the mood and the feel of the game. So could you talk about your ideas with that?
Yeah, totally. The art of the book is kind of like, it's basically it's a 220 something pages book. I think 200, I don't know, more or less, that's the number. Every spread is basically a full bleed illustration. Like every spread is illustrated. I think that was very important given that the fantasy world is so weird in a way and so different from like a traditional sort of like medieval Europe sort of like fantasy based kind of thing, that it had to have a strong presentation that could show you different facets of how this world actually looks like, so that people could actually be like, okay, this is how it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And for me personally, it was a huge sort of like artistic journey, because I
Mm-hmm.
started to learn to draw with Zephyr in a
Oh,
way.
wow.
And I did all the illustrations.
Amazing.
And I started around 2018, 2019. My best friend teaching me how to like draw with like the tablet over like Skype or over Discord or something like that. We
Mm-hmm.
just do calls and she'd teach me. So that's a thing, that's a process that took like 4 years of like just doing one illustration after the other. If you check the spreads, there's like very tiny print, you're going to be able to see the month and the date in which I did that
Oh,
illustration,
wow.
the month and the year.
Mm-hmm.
So you can sort of track the whole evolution of the style, etc., as I learned to draw and drew more of the world. But yeah, that's basically how it goes. And because it's fully illustrated, in terms of like graphic design, it's quite minimal. It's pretty much just underlines and very subtle graphics, because the illustrations are the thing that pops in a way. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's gorgeous. I didn't realize you'd done all of the art yourself. That's incredibly impressive, and it looks absolutely wonderful. So, well done for that. It's a gorgeous looking book. So yeah, so I'd definitely say it's almost as an art book for people if they wanted to get it for nothing else, if they thought they weren't going to play. But yeah. Thank you so much for talking through the game. Is there anything else you'd want to talk about, or maybe something we didn't get a chance to mention that you can think of?
No, it's just that it's it's a pretty weird game. Like be prepared to like stumble a bit. I think if you come from more more of a traditional thing. I've played a lot the game with like people that had never played RPGs before, and it's
Okay.
one of those things that like it's really not harder to learn than, I don't know, DnD fifth. It's just very different. So
Yeah.
it's yeah. It might take a bit, but give it a try. It's pretty cool, and there's nothing like it. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. I love what you said about it being good for new people as well, because I think sometimes if somebody's new to role-playing games, they don't have those preconceived ideas of what a tabletop role-playing game should be. So they don't have that reference points of, oh, where's my 20-sided dice and where's, so in a way that can be more helpful for learning it. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
totally.
interesting you mentioned that. Yeah. Okay, well, fantastic. Thanks so much. I would say to people, if you are at all interested, you can check it out on the web store, links on the screen or in the show notes, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff, if you can. Thank you so much for coming on. Before you go, I will ask the last question I ask everyone, which is, do you have any recommendations for any other tabletop RPGs? And this is one that you haven't made and, of course, is not D&D.
Cool. Yeah, I would probably want to recommend my favorite game, which is Dialect by Thorny Games. It's basically, the tagline is a game about language and how it dies. It's basically an indie game that has no GM, and it's kind of you building sort of like a community around a fictional language that you create, and how you go through different stages of that community's history, and you document how their language evolves. And it's really wonderful. It's really nice, and I think it's really cool that it's very niche. It's like specifically about language, and yeah, it's quite a magical game, I think, by Thorny Games.
Love that. Thank you so much. That's a really great recommendation. And I think that's the first time it's been recommended on the show. So thank you very much for that. All right. All right. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing the game with us. Wish you all the best. And let us know when you're working on your next project so we can have you back to talk about another game for sure.
Awesome. Great. Thanks.
And thank you for everyone who's watched and listened as well. We'll be back with another Indie Tabletop RPG to share with you next week. But for now, that's all. Thanks very much. And bye.